the live scene, and I guess we'll keep the goal up and stuff because reasons. All right. Hello everybody, my name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being here with me, or if you're watching the VOD, then thank you so much for even tuning into this video. This is kind of going to be a lecture that is designed to give you a perspective on how to go about planning a song out, as opposed to the typical way that I always do, which is, you know, go off of a feel and then try to ride the feel out and make as many decisions as possible, right? I have been successful in that, but I find that I'm trying to get into a refinement process of making tunes and making concepts that I can kind of execute, as opposed to just hoping that we do this from start to finish, if that makes sense. So planning a tune, in my opinion, is really more so of a means of storyboarding, right? Because like everything that has, you know, a beginning and end and a middle, or whatever, beginning, middle, and end, is a story in some case. And that's true whether it be, you know, a song, whether it be a movie, anything that is alluding to storytelling in general. Why would we want to do this? I think that it's sometimes like having our thoughts organized can really help us like execute something, as opposed to getting stuck and figuring out that we have no more decisions to make. And even then, this isn't foolproof by any means. It's still something that you're still going to get stuck. It's just part of it, right? But maybe as far as building something that's a little bit more cohesive, or something that is a little bit more quote unquote sophisticated, this can kind of help you upgrade all that and maybe become a better composer or a better producer, whatever it is that you want to be. So like one thing I want to point out is that while this is designed to serve as a guide for people that are in music production, this same stuff can be applied to any other form of art that you may or may not do. And that is kind of one of the beautiful things about art, is that it most of the time translates in a very seamless way. So, you know, if you're listening to this and you're not a music producer for whatever reason, you can still apply this to painting or writing or journalism or anything artistic in general. It is very important to say that what I'm about to tell you all is not the only way to do things. This is just a guide. I know that I've said that a billion times already, but it's not directly supposed to be something that is like the end-all be-all. It's more of just like, hey, here's a framework that we can use, and if it's useful to you, then use it. If it's not useful to you, then don't use it. Or maybe you like some things and you don't like some things. Like, I encourage you guys to explore on your own and don't take any of this stuff for face value. But the primary purpose of this is for people who like have beat block or something in general. Somebody that gets stuck in their tunes and they kind of want a way to kind of organize their thoughts in a way that has a little bit more of a flow to it, or a stream. And sometimes that can just be super useful in the sense of like, okay, now I know what to do next, right? So I am going to assume that the people that are listening to this is going to be, how do I say this? I do think that you can still get something out of this, and I'll try to make it as like beginner friendly as possible, but we're kind of going to guess that we're past the point of like, how do I throw a beat together, right? Or how do I put a melody together? Because if you know nothing about song creation or about producing or whatever, the first thing that you want to do is get those foundations and those building blocks to be like, all right, well, you know, how do I establish a beat, or how do I make a bass line, or how do I do something in that sense? So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, let me take a breath. In its simplest form, I want to say that the process of writing in general is making decisions and deciding whether you like them or not, or whether or not they fit. You will stumble upon happy accidents, and I will say that it's important to, you know, embrace those happy accidents. But in its simplest form, like you know, whenever you're putting something together, right, you're making a choice, and you're making thousands and thousands and thousands of choices, which I kind of want to throw out the perspective at the very beginning that like every song that you quote unquote finish is somewhat of a miracle, because if you think about how many choices you have to make in order for that to be considered done, it's quite a bit. And you make a lot of no's, but I think that you make a lot more yeses whenever you throw something together. And I think maybe that's one of the things that are so gratifying behind finishing the song in general, no matter how simple or complex it might be. So the first thing that I kind of want to introduce to you guys is something called song structure. And this is a very rudimentary idea, but it's the structure of what goes into a song, right? So we talked about the story element of beginning, middle, and end, but sometimes there's a little bit more nuance within something like that in regards to a tune, especially in this day and age. If you listen to something super complex, like Elon Moore, right? A lot of times he's got multiple parts of a tune that could very well be songs all on his own. Same thing with Cohen sound, same thing with echo. But the beautiful thing behind that is that within those, crazy tunes and stuff, they all have some kind of theme. They all have some kind of motif. And that would be our starting point, which I'll get to in a second. So for me, I personally have something of a structure that's like an intro. So we'll just assume that this is going to work. Okay, help us out here. All right, how about you work with me? There we go. So we've got an intro. Don't mind my horrible drawing. We have a main section. Oh my goodness, what is this? So we've got a main section 1. Then we have main section 1B. Then we go, or just, I guess we'll just like columnize it, but we'll go into a bridge. B for bridge. Then we'll go into main section 2. Call that M2. Then we have M2B. B. And then we have outro. Beautiful. This is probably going to be the most horrifying thing of this. Please don't judge me for my drawing. So in essence, I guess we have 7 parts. I have an intro, I have a main section 1, I have a main section 1B, then I have a bridge, then I have a main section 2, then I have a main section 2B, and an outro. This is like 95% of the way that I make tunes. But something that you can easily do is just have an intro, main section 1, bridge, main section 1, then main section, 1B, and then an outro, right? So all of these things that come into play are just key elements that you can use in order for you to kind of serve as building blocks. And the reason why this is important is because most of the time whenever you have these kinds of song structures, they're in blocks to some capacity. Now there might be these crossovers, there might be these bleed overs to where you can't really tell where you are. And sometimes the music is non-linear. Like maybe you go to one instance and then you bounce back, and then you go to one instance and then you bounce back, and it becomes something different. But this is, again, just kind of like serving as an easy guide about how to go from one place to the other. So imagine if you had a tune, or you had all these parts together, and it was just up to you to rearrange them in such a way that made sense. That's essentially song structure, right? For me personally, these days, I'll tell you right now, like I used to make really long tunes that were like 6 minutes and stuff. And while I feel very accomplished from making those, it was a lot of stress because I felt like I was making such a big epic to where each one of these parts almost, or maybe 2 of these parts, like 2 groups, were a completely different song on their own. And it can be done, and it's something that is a beautiful thing to do, but for now, at least for me, I try to simplify. I'm really comfortable with making like 2.5-minute songs at the most, and trying to make those ideas as interesting as possible. However, within all that stuff, it might not serve the purpose, or it might not serve the overall like theme about what it is that you're trying to convey. And that's kind of why coming into the idea of planning and stuff can be helpful. So the first thing that you want to do is figure out, well, all right, what do you want to say? Or what's the vibe that you want to go through? And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. And then basically we need to figure out a way to get there. We need to figure out a way to say, where does it go? And then we need to figure out a way of like making it end. And there's no right or wrong to that, but maybe having some kind of idea can be helpful in establishing how to build a quote-unquote structure in that sense. Hopefully that makes sense. I know that, again, this drawing is terrible or whatever, but that's kind of like the main basis about how that stuff works. So in general, whenever we do something like this, whenever we have an idea or whenever we're trying to, like, maybe we have no idea what we're doing. One of the easiest things that we can do is kind of go back and borrow from building off of nothing, right? Where we just start with the vibe. And the way that I categorize a vibe is more so of just like the feeling of the tune, right? And I think that the vibe can come from a few different things. Obviously, like, the vibe is synonymous with feeling, but that can be represented in a lot of different ways. And so some of the most common ways are using a reference track. So, like, maybe you hear something from an artist that you like and you want to make something that's in the same style. Maybe it's something that is on the idea of, like, chords and melodies, right? So a lot of times people are like, yeah, I'm going to start a song with 4 chords and then whatever. It's like the easiest way to write a pop song, because once you have the 4 chords, it's pretty much done. If you write pop, that's fine. It's not for me, but that's a different, neither here nor there. Or a melody, right? Which I'll talk about here in a second about how to establish a cool melody. Or it could be a rhythm, or it could be just a style of beat or a style of genre, right? Maybe you don't know what you want to make, but you know that you want the... Like, maybe that's what you want to start off with, and then everything else kind of fills in that sense. That's really going to help, and you guys know me. My channel has a lot of sound design, and so for me, the perspective that I'm coming at it is that most of my sound design is kind of to a level to where I have a selection of sounds to already choose from. So if you're going to get caught up in a sense, like, the first roadblock that you might run into is maybe you want to sound like this, but you can't make the sounds in general. That's kind of a different topic for a different day. But I will say that even if you don't have the sounds or whatever, like, try not to get too hung up on that, because really, like, the most gratifying thing, in my opinion, about music is just making something and finishing something, not just seeing if you can replicate a Cohen sound bass, or, you know, whether or not you can groove as hard as Flying Lotus. That's really not what you should be coming at this, in my opinion. That's your choice, but it should be more about, how do I practice completing something and then using that to cultivate becoming a better producer in that sense. And I think that if you approach it in that way, you're going to find your identity a lot faster within what kind of musician or producer you are, right? Or what kind of artist you are, in case if this is something completely different outside of music. You know, if you, like, don't try to just do Picasso, like, try to figure out what kind of painter you are if you paint. So starting from a vibe, which is the very same thing of, like, just starting with a core idea. And it could be anything. And maybe, like, it doesn't come together, so you kind of have to pull that up from scratch, which is where you kind of create, you know, a little loop or something. Well, once you kind of have something like that, then you can use that as a theme. And you can kind of decide what any of that means, right? Because once you have something like that, now what we're doing is using that idea as a catalyst to start figuring out the other ideas that are going to surround it. And maybe you might write something that starts off as the main idea, but then you write something that's cooler, and that becomes the cool idea or something. And it's important to stay spontaneous in that way, because you never know how it's going to turn out. But these are just possibilities to explore in that sense. So one thing that I want to kind of touch on before we continue about, like, getting the rest of the song structure and stuff done is, if you have no idea what to do, some stuff that I would really recommend, especially for melody writing or lyric writing, is or even rhythm, right? We'll talk about all three. So let's say, like, you want to create a feel that's sad, right? So one cool creative strategy that you can use for that is say something, make up some silly lyric that alludes to you being really sad. All right, well, here's the most basic one. I'm really sad. Okay, now sing that out in as many ways as you can possibly think. I'm really sad. That seems more happy, right? Okay, well, I'm really sad. Okay, well, maybe I like that. So one trick that you can do is to keep that melody in your head and then try to replicate that in terms of a piano or something different that can, I guess, help you translate to what it is that you're feeling, if that makes sense. And I think that's a really powerful tool, because for me personally, I don't really use lyrics. I also don't really use music anymore in general, but it can be something that can help you honestly express yourself, as opposed to just try to come up with something on the fly. Now, the same thing can be done with beatboxing, which is a little bit more relative to the things that I do, which if you know me, I like to make a lot of crazy like IDM and all that stuff. So what I might do is I might be like, all right, well, I want to start a tune. What am I going to do? I've got nothing, no drums, no bass whatsoever. Make something up. Okay, here we go. Okay, I like that. So I might record that into the DAW, or I might just record that in general. But what I can use is take that same reference or take that same rhythm and apply that in a way that translates into something with the DAW. Now, those sounds that I just did might be completely different. They might be glitches. They might come out as something, that might not be the same at all. But I'm allowing myself to just be spontaneous in that moment, to just create something out of nothing. And the more comfortable that you can be with that, and the more that you not care at the very beginning, the more that you can start building off of that. The other thing that kind of coincides with both of those is going back to storytelling. Maybe you have a specific part that you want to start off with the story, right? So maybe you are trying to make a song about an experience that you had. All right, well, I want to make a song about when I dropped my ice cream. Well, what's the overall feel? What was that feeling that I expressed or that I felt with that? And really try to slow that moment down of in slow motion when maybe you tipped your cone over and the ice cream thing is dropping. Well, what does that sound like, right? What does that event sound like in general? And those can be some things that you can start to use to create an idea in general. And those, of course, aren't the end all be all things about that, but that's how you can get to any one of these sections that you want to start off with. Maybe, instead you're going to focus on the intro and you don't really know what it is that you want to say, but you are noticing a new beginning of something and you have this big grandiose thing of I hear this crazy soundscape of a gate opening and what's behind the gate. I don't know, maybe it's, crazy horns or whatever, or maybe it's a gate to a spaceship, but it starts to give you ideas about what to fill these elements with context. I know that sounds crazy, but hopefully these were some things that will kind of help you get to the next part, which is the most common thing. I had a feeling that was going to happen, which is the most common thing, which is getting stuck in the 8-bar loop of death, right? That is the number one thing that we all get into. And that's probably why you are listening to this lecture in the first place if you're still around. So the 8-bar loop of death is when you build a concept, when you build an idea, and then you have no idea what to do with it next. I've done it. I've gotten into it. I know that just about everybody I know has gotten into the 8-bar loop of death. And I can say that the primary goal of this entire video is to talk about how to get out of that. So the reason why we get stuck in it in the first place is because, for one, it's usually an idea that we get fixated on, right? And we focus all of our energy and all of our perspective on making this idea as cool and as interesting as possible. Now, that's not a bad thing, because most of the time that 8-bar loop that we're making is supposed to be the most interesting part, is supposed to be the main element of whatever it is that we're building, right? And so what you want to do is kind of pull yourself out of that for a hot second and really take a good look out of it and really separate yourself once that idea is, to a place where you start thinking about, well, what do I want to do next? Having this structure right here, having this kind of thing with whatever it is that you want to do of a song structure will kind of allow you to go to the next step in a very small way. For example, maybe that 8-bar loop that I made is supposed to be the main section 1, which is usually what I do. Once you kind of do that, then if you can step away from it and look at it from a visual perspective as opposed to what you hear, then you can start thinking about possibilities, right? So there's a couple of different ways to do that. I'm going to show you in just a second, but let me make sure that I'm on task for my thoughts. All right, so once you place this in a song structure, right, this is probably option A that I would do. So let's just go to a new, and we'll discard, and let's just kind of do that same thing again. So where we have intro, we'll go 1A this time. And then we've got, That's supposed to be that's supposed to be 1B. We've got 1B, then we've got just regular bridge, and then we've got 2. Oh my gosh, this trackpad is rough. 2A, and then we've got 2B, and then we have outro. Where does this 8-bar loop or something fit within this? And let's just say it's an 8-bar loop. It could be anything. Maybe it's just like one idea in general that has a particular like measure of time. So where does it fit in that? Then once you have that, once you place that in, that means that you've got at least one part out of this section filled out. And so as opposed to listening to it over and over again and hoping that you hear something of what to do next, place it on something visual like this. Use a piece of paper even, and just like place this in a like on one of these areas and label it as your main idea. Then what you need to do is step away from the DAW. In my opinion, some people would disagree with me. I think that you definitely should step away from the DAW. You can listen to it outside of looking at your computer and stuff, but I think that if you pull yourself away and you start to practice imagining what to do next, then things might start to come up. Then what you can do is start relating to all these things in the same kind of strategies that I was representing at the beginning of the lecture, which is, where does it fit? Where does it want to go? How do you want to end it? Where is this in the placement of the sort? That's more of a conceptual thing. The other thing that you can do is kind of cut all this stuff out, and we'll just discard this and we'll just call this idea. So this is just wide I, right? But what you want to do is make this into a bubble and start creating a web of different ideas that you might want to do. So maybe this section is something that we've already written down, right? All right, well maybe for a possibility that we can do is go into something that's like triplets. I'm just going to write 3 because that's the easiest thing to do. Come on, help me out here. Right, there we go. Triplets, right? So, and then I'm like, all right, well, once I go from this to this, well, what else can I do? Well, maybe I want to go into something that's like an ambient pad. That's an A, just pretend. That looks like LA, lol. Maybe I want to go into something that's like an ambient pad. Well, what could that sound like? And do I have any sounds from here that I can pull into this section, which I'll talk about more here in just a second. Maybe for the next thing, I actually want to go into a chord progression, right? We'll just use C for chord progression, or C/M. That's not to be confused with C minor or whatever. It's more of like a chords/melodies. Maybe in this sense, I want to go into something that sounds completely different with a completely new set of drums. So, you know, you can label this as D. And then what you can do is maybe you take one of these ideas and you apply one of them, and one of them works. Well, then what you can do is start this all over and then do the same thing, but from a different reference, and pull it back in. And suddenly what you have is the same network of these different components or these different parts to your tune that you can start thinking about connecting in creative ways in order to create your arrangement. Whether or not that's something that might actually be useful to you is one thing, because I know that's a lot of work outside the DAW. But man, I'm telling you, stepping away from listening to the same loop over and over again can be incredibly useful in that sense. So let's say none of this stuff works and you just like want to keep going and keep making decisions, right? Let's say that as opposed to planning this out, you're kind of like on that sense of like, all right, well, I got this far and I kind of want to do something different in general. What you want to do is, I'm going to type this out, and this is going to be called, hopefully, does this work? There we go. Here we go. Duplicate and variate. You've got section 1A. Duplicate 1A over. Even if you don't change anything, you've just doubled the amount of time and the amount of content that you initially didn't have. And all you have to do is change some things about it, right? You can add some elements. You can take some elements away. You can add a rhythmic element or add a melody to it, and that can become your B section. That's what this would become. So it goes from 1A, it would technically be to 1B, right? So because these two are kind of similar in context, then what you can do is you can take this idea and duplicate it again. Okay, that's not working. And duplicate it again down somewhere like right here, and you make a completely different section out of it, which is most of the time what I do out of that. So I'll take 1A and I will just destroy it and completely ignore whatever this idea was and completely reorganize it, because really all the sounds are there. Completely reorganize. I can't type today. Sorry. Too many thoughts. Completely reorganize. And so what that ends up becoming from here is section 2A. Or maybe it's a possibility. And maybe you do this multiple times, right? Maybe instead of doing the main section, you've found yourself into an intro. Okay, well, the intro is cool. All right, I guess that's not working, but maybe the intro is cool or whatever. Well, what elements can you take from that and use that to, it's something that Frequent taught me, but cross-pollinate into the next section. Now, how creative you get with that is going to be up to you, but maybe it's something entirely different, such as like, maybe you take a rhythm that you've established in the intro, but you do something completely different with the sounds. Maybe you do a completely different sound palette or whatever, but you still have a quote-unquote motif that you're carrying into the next section, right? So that's one way that you can kind of do all this stuff. Sorry, dogs are outside barking. The next thing that you can consider, I'm going to reset this as well, is to take away the idea and kind of like circumvent all these kind of new things that we have or whatever into something completely different. And what I mean by that is, instead of going into the planning phase or whatever, which is still, you know, important, which is kind of the theme of this, something else that you can do is to write out a bunch of different sections in different projects or whatever, because who's to say that you have to have an entire song in one project, right? But you can practice making completely different, I guess, sections or something in different projects or whatever, and then you can basically combine those into creating a new song. Doesn't matter about the mixing, doesn't matter about whatever, stem it out, place it in, and find a way to make them work together. So really, I think that like the biggest trap of the 8-bar loop is just getting in the sense that like it has to come to you, it has to make sense or whatever, but really it's using some simple strategies like this to be like, all right, well, I don't know what to do next, but I know that these other parts in my tune, right, because maybe this is the main section, but these other parts need filling. So it doesn't have to work in a linear fashion. You can just kind of focus on using this as a means of blocks. And I think that this is very apparent for people that are used to using like clip launchers and stuff, like maybe Session View and Ableton and whatnot, because all the sections are already there. If you remember back at the beginning of the lecture that I was talking about, I was saying, imagine if you already had all the parts together. Well, all you have to do is just take it one part at a time. It doesn't have to be something that's elaborate, and it doesn't have to be done. You don't have to have every single part that you're doing like completely finished. You just need the core concept of it, or quote unquote the skeleton of it. So maybe, you know, becoming aware of those roadblocks will kind of help you figure out what to do next from that section. Like maybe you have a really cool 8-bar loop and you don't know what to do next. Instead of trying to completely fill out the next section, you just do a little bit of what the intro might be. And it doesn't even have to make sense. You can just sketch something out. Maybe you do the drums for the entire tune because you know how it wants to flow in that sense. And everything else needs to kind of like fill in the gaps, and then it becomes paint by numbers, right? Those are some things that you can use in order to kind of get out of that, in order to kind of get past the 8-bar loop. And once you have that, as long as you have an understanding of song structure, then you can use that to tie into, you know, the overall theme about what it is that you're doing. So in conclusion, I guess, or in to summarize things, we kind of want to think about the vibe. We kind of want to think about the theme. Establish a theme. There's a lot of different ways to do that, as we talked about, whether it be through melody, a reference tune, establishing rhythm. Then we want to think about how it applies within a song structure. So once you establish a song structure, it doesn't matter what it is, and it can be, you know, super abstract or whatever. Try to imagine some possibilities that can become, and then place it in there. And suddenly you've placed something not only on the timeline, but you're starting to say, like, here's a piece of the puzzle, right? Then once we do that, some things that we can try to practice are like the duplicate and variate, or we can try imagining where something wants to go, or we can kind of cover all of the other strategies that we talked about from before about using the same thing of like, you know, maybe you build one vibe together, but then you want to like make the same song, or make it the same song, but you want to change the vibe. Well, just reset. You can use the web thing to basically create possibilities or to think about possibilities that a song can turn into, or again, just kind of throw it into a structure and, play with the idea about where it fits and then cross-pollinate from duplicating and variating, right? So yeah, I think that this isn't the end-all be-all, but if you can take yourself away from listening to the same thing way too many times, and you can kind of keep this like fettered or unfettered mind about like not being too focused on one thing, then it will help you maintain a healthy perspective whenever you're making tunes, and it will help you kind of in one way or another try to avoid beat block. And the more that you have something planned out, like maybe you know exactly what you want to do as far as rhythm wise, you don't know the details of it, but you have this whole thing kind of like sketched out, well then it's going to be a lot easier for you to finish because you already know what's supposed to come next. You can already have like some kind of hint, because it's never like whatever you hear in your head is never going to be a one-to-one translation, unless if you just write completely in melodic terms or harmonic terms, like with a single instrument or whatever. Most of the time with sound design, it's going to be a little bit different, right? But you can essentially use that as a reference for your own musical creation because you've kind of already sketched everything out. It's almost like you're looking at, a picture of something else and then you're drawing your own version of it, except the picture that you're looking at is something that you sketched out from before. People do this all the time in so many other forms of art and forms of medium. Concept art, right? Make a concept tune and then flesh the concept out. It seems like super simple, but I mean, in terms of that, like it really is. It's just a matter of like how you relate that information into the terms of like how it's supposed to be done in music. And that kind of alludes to the overarching thing about this entire, I guess, presentation, which is the idea that a lot of the skills that we learn, especially in the creative world, can be translated to everything else that we do in life. Because for one way to look at it is it's all problem solving, and it's all systematic of like how we do things, which is very synonymous with our quote unquote workflow. So how does your workflow with the other things that you do or with the way that you make music work for you, as opposed to, you fighting yourself in your own mindset with your own like creativity or that you feel like you have a lack of? Because everybody's creative. I truly believe that everybody is creative, and I do believe that it can be cultivated. But get out of your own mind, get out of your own head, cultivate, like own it. Like, and I'm not saying that as a means of like conquer yourself, right? But more of a means of like try to establish that awareness so you can start to recognize when something isn't working, and you can start to recognize when you might be running into a problem and you have a different strategy or a backup plan or a backup thing to try to continue working healthily in the DAW. I don't know. That's my biggest thing is like, I hate when I run into a roadblock and I'm like, I was stuck and I don't know what to do. So I put a lot of thought into how to like kind of tackle this. And I'm actually curious as to what you guys have. Again, I haven't been reading chat, but I'll take a look in just a second and then look at the comments and all that stuff of like how you guys get over the quote unquote beat block or how you guys kind of structure this stuff. So the other benefit to why this might be useful to you all is because once we take this idea of having a finished tune, right, and we get it down to a science, well then we can kind of take that a step bigger and start thinking about, well, how can we use this like to create a bigger theme to create an album, right? And it's just building blocks. It's two simple things put together. I have an idea for a tune. Well, now that I have the tune, like what does the tune feel like? All right, well, what if I wanted this to be a scene as opposed to just a clip? And then suddenly you're putting together an audio movie, which sounds ridiculous, but hopefully that analogy works to some capacity, right? Excuse me. So I think that the next section that I want to cover, which will be at another time, is part 2, which will be the concept of planning to fail. And that will be covering the more spontaneous aspect of building music, of just going by feel and how to make that work and how to make the most out of that. And then I also want to do part 3 to where we are kind of doing like what I was talking about before of actual beatboxing, of like beatboxing an entire tune out, right? And beatboxing can be, either like, humming a melody, or it can be actual like, beatboxing beats or whatever, and then figuring out how to translate that to some degree to an actual finished tune. So yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to my crazy long-winded lecture. I'm going to open up chat now and see if anybody has anything to say on it. But if this is the end and you guys are watching this VOD, then please do me a favor and like my video, subscribe to me. Just help me grow my channel. I appreciate it. Help me get back into the algorithm. So yeah, let's go ahead and open up for questions. Whew. Wow. Okay. Let's see. Yo, if you are taking questions, how long is too long for a single section? If one is double the standard length, would you compensate for the other sections? I mean, typically, like, a section is anywhere from 8 to 16 bars, depending on if you're double or halftime, right? But I mean, like, that's just a guide. That's just like a starting point. Like, you can actually have something be 6 bars or be 12 bars or whatever. It's just a matter about how you express that in one sense or another. Do you prefer spontaneous sound design or weaving sound design into the planning process? I do a bit of both. So usually what I'll do is I'll start by making some kind of sound or something that is interesting, and then I'll try to find a way to contextualize that into creating an actual part, right? But sometimes, like, whenever I'm already like in the midst of producing, then I might hear something outside of this, and then sometimes I have the wherewithal to like just make it. Sometimes I'll have to do a little bit of searching, but like, it's really important to not spend too much time on that aspect, because sometimes you can get really caught up, and that's like one of those like key pitfalls of not making tunes anymore. Shit, what'd I miss? I tend to mix it up. I find personally when I purely have a sound design session, my attention span is less than the exciting process of implementing the sound design into the idea of making. I came here for the artwork. Needs more color. Thank you. Are you okay? Evening all, we're here for you. I'm really sad. Yeah, it happens, right? It sounded like weeping toddler. Rage? From what? Been there? Oh boy, endless loop. Will this be saved? It's 4 a.m. Yes, it will. Membership, baby. Save all the VODs. So this, Alckemy poor handwriting. I am left-handed. This VOD will be public. It's just kind of like, I wanted to do something a little bit different today, to have more of like a discussion lecture as opposed to, hey, watch my video and then comment on it, right? So yeah, there's that. Looks like a person without an arm. I'm still waiting for him to break out into his Bob Ross voice. Oh, I love duplicating and... Wait, what just happened? Do and reforging sections. Imagine you had a tune. Haha, that's golden. Just install an app like MindNode. Makes thought bubbles and sub bubbles. There's a few free with his apps. I hear Final Fantasy X sounds. Me happy. Writing all my ideas down, sometimes phone memo just to make sure I don't forget the details, because my ideas come way faster than I can work them out within a day. Same. If I have beat block, then I take a little break from the project. When I come back with a fresh set of ears, I can judge it better, whether or not to ditch it or keep at it, reorganize, or just salvage / save presets. The toddler and rage was the imagining what... Oh, a tipping... Oh, right. Ice cream is my cream, right? That's pretty funny. So I often make 8 bars that sound okay, but after taking the time to create a mini track full of 8 bars, it starts to sound mundane, maybe because I play it too many times and then I don't feel like finishing it. So I definitely think that's from like listening to the same thing too many times, right? And so like once you become bored of it, it's important to establish like an awareness of being like, I'm bored of this, or like I'm burnt out, because that happens. Like our ears get tired, right? I actually have so many ideas yet to work out, execute, that I'm not suffering much beat block, but planning a structure and workflow is a must for me, kind of like a script. Yeah, and like once you, like, even if you plan out a song, it doesn't have, like, you don't have to execute it exactly. It's just giving yourself like a head start about how to continue to the next part if you get stuck, you know? Unfinished ideas is me all over, and that's totally fine. But like it's also important to consider, like, what do you need, or what does that specific tune need to be quote unquote finished? And don't talk about it from like a mixing standpoint, right? Or like, oh, my bass isn't cool enough. You know, don't talk about it from that sense. Like, try to come at it more from like, well, this part isn't, like, I don't have this part. I don't have this part. There is not a middle section. There is not an ending. There is not a beginning. Those are the kinds of things that you want to try to look at first, because the goal of today's lecture is to talk about how to finish an arrangement or how to plan out a song from beginning to end, and then you can fill out all the details. It's really easy to get caught up in the mixing stuff. Okay, if you get really, like, I learned this from Musar. So big ups to him. But if you get caught up in like the mixing aspect of things, honestly, turn your sound completely off and write in silence. Like, don't even use audio or anything. Use silent clips and write a tune out as an exercise. Or hold on, let me take that back. Let's pretend like you have an 8-bar loop and you don't know what to do next. Write the next part in silence and just let it go. Just write that part. Even if you have no idea what you want to do with it, just take some silence and start writing with it. And then imagine what it would sound like. Once you have that key core idea, then maybe what you can do is start adding the idea of one part at a time or another. It could be something in the sense of like, I wrote everything in silence. Well, what I would probably start with is the drums. Well, once I have this rhythm down that I think that it's going to sound like, apply some noise to it or replace the sounds, with a kick. Okay, is the kick where it's supposed to be? Is the snare where it's supposed to be? Do I like the rhythm that this is going? Let's say that you have all that down, like you like the rhythm and stuff, and you're going into a new bass line, but your bass line is like quote unquote whack, or it's just not sounding the way that you want it to. Well, make it silent and just pretend, right? Like it's interesting that we don't pretend whatsoever when we're in the DAW. Because we have instant gratification of pulling noise in, the only thing that we ever do is try out a song, or try out a sound rather, and see if it fits or not. Or we'll tweak it until we think that it fits. Just pretend your shit is dope. Like, just pretend it's amazing for 1 second and see what you can do with that. Now, I'm being totally hypocritical because I have relayed this advice a lot and it's really hard to do, but I do believe that this is a healthy mindset to cultivate. Because if you can take yourself out of what your expectations are for your own like critique or like for your own criticism, then you can allow yourself to just be a kid or to just be an artist and to just create. Because that's really what it's all about. It's not about getting into, making the best tune that you possibly can right now. It's about, I want to create something and I want it to, and I want to pretend like it sounds amazing. Or I just want it to, for just a second, because, we take ourselves way too serious. Pretend like actors and do, yeah, exactly. Pretend like actors do in front of a green screen. Oh my God, I'll listen to the rest of this later. Thanks to the stream, grown wife needs more Pokeballs. What? Okay. Happy hunting. So within all that stuff, this, again, like I really want to stress out that this is just like one idea, right? This is just one way that you can approach all of these things. And there's really no right or wrong. But if you can kind of put yourself into a position of like developing or starting to think about ways to organize your thoughts together, I think that it can help you in figuring out what to do next. And that's the biggest like problem or the biggest thing that I want to focus on tackling, if that makes sense. So yeah. Does anybody have any other questions or anything else that they want to discuss? And I guess like my next question would be, I'm actually curious as to what you all think about this kind of presentation as opposed to doing it through video form, which is what I usually do. See ya, Alckemy. Take care. Like, would you guys prefer like an edited version with like editing, edited version with editing, or like do you guys enjoy like having the live lecture scenario to where you can actually talk to me and then I can like answer your questions live or something? I quite like it. Cool. I'm glad somebody does. Loving this actually fits the topic. This is a good idea. Live is always better, but harder to reach folks. Live is dope. Yeah, I think that I've been talking about doing this for a while, but I wanted to do a guideline to how to find yourself as an artist. And I think that this is going to be the easiest format that I can do. A bit more loose and natural. I'm really liking this, but I started it late. I want to come back when it's all done and watch it as a whole. Just to let you know, I think it's legit. Dude, thank you so much. Yeah, like I said, like most of the time, I think that most of the time I save the VODs for members, but I think that for a video like this in particular, I'm going to leave it up because like this was originally a video idea as opposed to like a stream. This was meant to be like educational, and when it's something that's dedicated towards education, I usually leave that as public, whereas anything that I do creation-wise is usually what the VODs for members are, if that makes sense. So yeah. Cool. Well, I will try to do the next few like lecture topics or whatever over a live stream. And if you guys have any ideas or things that you want me to talk about in the future, then let me know in the Discord. I currently have some other things planned out. For example, I have part 2 and 3 planned out for this, which the first one is the first one is, oh my gosh, where are my notes? This is why I write things down. How to plan to fail, like how to plan to fail. And then this part 3 is beatboxing. And then I might even do a part 4, which is going to get into how to take creative notes. Although I need to do a little bit more research into that before I start talking about things that are going to work that might not work at all. And then let me see. Aside from that, I've got how to find yourself as an artist, which is going to be really long-winded but very informative, I think. And then we'll do some other things that I want to talk about that's going to be more conceptual as opposed to like here's sound design or here's something that's more concrete. I like doing this stuff, and I think it's important to talk about philosophical aspects of things. So I also noticed that just opening the DAW and grabbing something that comes to mind helps me instead of just sitting and waiting for inspiration. Sometimes ideas pop up in moments I'm doing something else. Yeah, so that's why I was saying like at the beginning of being like, okay, well, once you open the DAW, have an objective, which is establishing a vibe, right? Because once you do that, you're giving yourself a head start to create a reaction. Mr. Bill talked about it, and I don't want to quote him on it, but what I got from his lecture was that for him, he's kind of a reactive creative person, meaning that he like creates more ideas off of something that he responds to. As opposed to somebody that just hears something and is able to make it, which I know somebody like that, and she's pretty talented. And, you know, if you have that, then you probably don't need this video, to be honest. But for me personally, I'm very like, I get inspired off of things that I hear as opposed to finding inspiration from the self. Sort of. This is kind of like tricking yourself, right? Because if you create something and then you figure out how to find inspiration from what you create, then essentially like you're doing the same thing in one twisted way or another, right? It'd be cool to also talk about general creative inspirations and applying insights from those music/sound. I learn a lot from visual art and other stuff myself, and how to apply that to music. So you're talking about like how to find inspiration from things that are outside of music in general, just like other forms of media. That's on the list too. But I don't know how I want to present that. Like I have a way that I can do that, but I'm kind of reserved on doing that in particular because that's something that Frequent taught me. And I would almost rather him teach that because he's the one that taught it to me. You know what I mean? You guys could always reach out to Frequent and ask him about that if you want. But yeah, like cooking or doing dishes, but they often pop up when just grabbing a synth or some drums and suddenly boom, idea. Yeah, that's why it's important to go into that section I was going to talk about with taking creative notes, right? Or having like a recorder next to you and doing that effectively to something that sparks the original idea or the original memory that you have, as opposed to like listening to it 2 hours later and being like, wait, what was this? So I often ask people to consider inspiration because it can mean having ideas and being in the mood to make music. Yeah, we talked about that, I think, at one point or another. So yeah, since I still have you guys, if you want to support the channel, I have a bunch of really cool presets and samples and stuff available on alckemy.com, or consider becoming a member if you like this kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, like, this is kind of what I do now, so I don't feel so guilty for telling you guys to support the channel. Most of my inspiration comes from my mood, as weird as it sounds. Well, that's kind of cool too, but like, maybe if you know that, then being like, there's an amount of self-awareness that you can take with being aware of what your mood is, right? So like, maybe you're in a bad mood, or maybe you're feeling something in one particular way or whatever. Find out how to translate that. I gave you some strategies earlier in the lecture to, you know, figure out how to get yourself there. But in that sense, like, if you can figure out how to communicate that, then I think that you'll always have like a choice to go off of. You know, the first thing that you ask when you open the DAW is what mood am I in? I'm in a good mood today. Maybe that means that I'm going to make something completely dark. Wait, what? I'm in a good mood. I don't know. Sometimes moods just work that way, right? Yeah, that's kind of how I am. No matter what mood I am, I just want to make something like evil and edgy and heavy. But, you know, figure out how that relates, and figure out, like, maybe do an experiment that could be cool as well, is like be hyper aware of your mood and just start writing ideas, and like be non-judgmental about it whatsoever, and just write for 30 minutes and see what that is. And then do it again, and then do it again, and see what kind of music you actually end up writing whenever you're in a particular mood, and see if there's a pattern. That could be really interesting, but I feel like you'd have to have a lot of I feel like you'd have to have a lot of discipline to build that sense of awareness, right? And that's a really long process. For me, it can be both, and both triggered in several ways. One of them is just putting myself in the DAW chair, let the music create itself, sort of thing. Yeah, but also like reviewing it, right? Of being like, okay, I'm just going to let it do what it wants to do, and then like reflect on it and see if you do have, like, you know, patterns within that. Yeah, I think that like inspiration can come at any point, at any time, and you don't have to limit yourself to like one specific way. Like, you can have a favorite or whatever, but I think that like you don't have to be inspired to start planning a song out. I think that it definitely helps, right? It definitely helps motivate you. But this is something that you can do even if you don't feel like writing music. Like, you can sketch out an entire album concept without writing any music whatsoever, because what you're doing is building a story, or building a collection of stories, right? And once you kind of have those ideas, and once you've kind of started to do that, then it's just a matter of going a little bit deeper and adding a little bit more context, adding a little bit more context, adding a little bit more context. And suddenly, like, I can see, maybe, you know, it doesn't work every time, but I can see somebody using that as inspiration, of being like, it's time to write music. Knowing a scale is really all you need, to be honest. Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. Because what if you make music that has no melody whatsoever? Right? What if it's just completely rhythm focused? I think that knowing a scale, if all you know is a scale, I do think that can be helpful, but I don't think that you need to know, like, knowing a scale is all you need. All you really need to know is just like one piece of music, and figure out how to apply that to a lot more ideas, right? All the ideas I get and work and try and see how it sounds, I tend to end up only 10% of it, which is already an overkill at that point. Yeah, I mean, that's just the reality of like translation, right? I feel like sometimes we can get so fixated on having to complete something or make the final product, which is a bad goal. Which isn't a bad goal, but the best inspiration comes when you're just having fun, and it's important to have fun with it and play around sometimes. Translation, I'm a weirdo. No, I didn't know any scales for my first 2 years, yet I was creating lots of ideas. Yeah. What Data Broth is talking about is what I'll be talking about in part 2, which is the importance of planning to fail. Because that will kind of get into the idea of reacting off of spontaneity, and the idea of like the importance of happy accidents and stuff, which I don't want to talk about today, but we will in the future. Having fun is important because A, it's fun, and B, it tends to lead to way better results. That's hit or miss. Sometimes I have fun doing the dumbest stuff and it sounds terrible. Sometimes I am having fun and it becomes the best thing that I've quote unquote ever written. The Source of Nightmares was like, I was really into it, but I wouldn't say that I was having the most fun. I was just so focused on writing tunes and in that mindset of when I was writing The Source of Nightmares, that like I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. So failing to plan can also be planning to fail. Yes, but it doesn't go backwards. So if you plan to fail, that doesn't mean that you're failing to plan. And we'll talk about it later, Greedo. Like, not right now. To change the subject. I don't want to talk about that right now. When music feels forced and treated like work, it really shows for me anyways. Yeah, but that might be true, but maybe the music that you make can be a reflection of hard work, right? So like, it's really important that and these are the kinds of things that I really want to get people out of the idea of being like, it has to be this, or when you think about it this way, it's this, or when it's this, because honestly, the overarching idea about all this stuff is that it depends. It always depends. It depends on your perspective, on how you perceive how you make music. If you force yourself to make music, but you realize that you know that it's going to take a lot of work, but you have, you have the willpower to like push through, that's part of you being an artist. Like, part of being an artist in general is what you have to go through in order to make a tune. It's not just the end result, right? And it's important to recognize that, and it's important to appreciate that in some cases. Can you get better or more efficient or develop more skill? Yes. But that's the whole point of growing as an artist, as opposed to I am an artist and this is what I am and this is all I am. My signal was lagging bad. Hey, Alckemy. Hey, dude. Are you planning on leaving this VOD up? Really want to watch, but I need to go to work. Yes, this will be up later. This will be public. I think the fun also comes when you're happy with your results. At least that happens to me. Yes. So like, to me, the most fun thing is when you start a vibe and you like it. That is, man, that's good stuff. When you start a vibe and you like what you're making, and it's not just like, yeah, I think I'm kind of feeling it, and you know that like you're going to listen to it later and it's going to suck, but when you know that you've got a solid idea down, yeah, because I think that motivates you to like try something more. You're going to want to put more energy into it. You're going to want to go to the next step. But that doesn't always happen. Maybe you've got a crappy idea or whatever, but that doesn't mean that the idea isn't, sorry, I shouldn't even say crappy idea. Maybe it has an idea that you're not really like resonating with, and that doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It just means that it's not really what you're looking for, right? Because to some people, and I've had this a lot of times where I've scrapped projects and stuff and people are like, no, why'd you do that? Like it was a great idea. And I'm like, it's not me or whatever. Like, and that's ultimately up to you, but it's important to be aware of those things and like maybe sometimes know that like the idea might not be what you're looking for right now, but it could be in a couple weeks. It could be in a couple years, right? So stem your stuff out. Sometimes you just wake up in the morning and decide it's not good. In that case, just trust yourself and be happy with your ability to judge and be real with yourself. Knowing your flaws is amazing, even if you don't mind having them. Yeah. So we're starting to get off topic into something completely different, right? We're talking about inspiration and all that. That's not the point of this video. Your ideas are all valid and amazing, and I value those. But what I'm talking about, what I wanted to talk about today specifically, was how to plan to write a song regardless of how you're feeling. This is a rational, unbiased, logical process to creating a tune. It's a logical structure in which you are trying to develop a way to try to work. All of the in-betweens and stuff that you have versus being inspired and not inspired is definitely valid. But I really want to make sure that that's not what you guys are taking away from this right now for this particular idea. Because regardless of how you feel, if you have something, yeah, I indeed thought inspiration. No, this is how to plan how to write a song. That's what today's topic is. It's not how to be inspired. It's not, no, you're okay. I'm just letting you know. This is more so about how to find strategies to work through this stuff, to work when things aren't working, or to get through when things aren't working, regardless of how you feel. And that's not to say that I'm treating this like work. I'm saying that sometimes you go through these areas of like, maybe you don't feel inspired. Maybe you don't know what to do. Maybe you have these insecurities. And instead of relying on just having the feel to guarantee your success, sometimes you need strategies, or sometimes you need like skill sets in order to help get you through or to problem solve, right? And I do think that it's important to sometimes be an artist and sometimes be a scientist. So this is a scientific approach to artistry, which kind of doesn't really go hand in hand, right? Based off of what I just said. But there will be a middle ground in between. And it will be something that, regardless of how much of an artist we are, I think that everybody has a basic pattern to some degree of how something cultivates together. And it might be a little bit different every way, but I do think that there's always these like core things that people do, right? For example, I make music, you guys make music, Noisy makes music. And you know what we all do together, aside from making music? We all put drums together, right? We all make drums. We all lay down a beat. How we do that is what makes us different. How we... in what way that we represent that and what sounds we choose is what makes us different. And there's a beauty to that. Those are the kinds of, but like at the, I guess like, you know, kind of pulling that back too though, but like the core value is that we all still do the same thing. So it's important to focus on using those skills regardless of what your taste is to be able to make something and put something together, whether you feel like you connect with it or not. That's like what today's purpose is, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's a bunch of other different like compositional things that we can look at in order to like build ideas and stuff off of, but this is just kind of me sharing my knowledge base of like, here is something that I think will be useful to you if you are stuck, or if you want to like go a little bit deeper into like, how do I say, into like scheming, right? And maybe you don't even have any interest in this, or maybe somebody is so confident in their music that they're like, I don't need to think about this stuff because it just comes together. But I feel like for me, like if I can get into more of investing myself in spending time with music as opposed to just time in the DAW, excuse me, I think that helps me build up some of the weaknesses that I have as a producer and as an artist, and it helps me find a more complete package in creating worlds and creating more in-depth stories and creating something that is more complex, right? So I encourage you guys to explore these kinds of things. I encourage you to explore, you know, other methods of creating music or whatever. And by doing so, you are going to find what works for you, at least in the moment, because that might change too. Yeah. So Brandon is here for the giveaway. I don't know what to tell you. You tell me that every time you come in. Thanks for the memes. But yeah, I guess that's pretty much all I have for this particular subject. Does anybody have any other questions or comments regarding the topic that they want to talk about? Because I don't want to make this video too long. I would rather try to keep it somewhat concise to a degree that people can digest, because it's already over an hour, and I was hoping for it to be like 45 to 50 minutes, because I'm not going to edit it. It's just going to be up. But yeah, I definitely want to make sure that I get all your questions and stuff. I'm going to give you just a couple more seconds to type. Yeah. Subscribe if you're not. Brandon is here for the giveaway. Once we get 10,000 subs, then I'm giving away a sub pack. I just reviewed it. So if you're wondering what a sub pack is, or you don't even know what you want, because I'm pretty sure that if you don't have one, you want this, go watch that review. Consider becoming a member. Consider maybe purchasing something off of alckemy.com. And yeah, I guess nobody else has any questions on anything. So I am so grateful for you guys to join me today. I wasn't sure who was going to be here for this, but thank you guys so much for listening to this long-winded lecture on, you know, just philosophical things. I love doing this kinds of stuff, and I hope that you guys like listening to it. If you have any suggestions, then let me know either in the comments or on Discord if you want me to talk about something. But thank you all. If your head is messy like mine, you work in several projects, make your notes have all the corresponding project names and all. Yeah, like label your tracks and your project stuff, right? So yeah, thank you guys so much. And if you guys have any questions be outside of this, like outside of this lecture, video, or live stream stuff, just leave it in the comments. You know that I respond to everybody, or we can talk about it on Discord. But yeah, much love to you all. I think I'm going to play some Dying Light, and yeah, we'll pick this up soon. Bye, everybody.